now it's on. Make sure that my mic is working. Yep. All right. So, well, we didn't really lose a whole lot of stuff. Just the initial part of this. All right. So that means you really want to make sure that your process is quote unquote bulletproof when you install your CD. So with this in mind, what we're doing here is to visit the download link of network install of Debian. You don't have to do it now because we won't have enough time to actually finish the entire thing. But I will open a new tab, just to bring you to that page, and you can see the image files, the CD images are between 150 to 280 megabytes, depending on which distribution and which architecture you're using. Would that be considered a lot of content? Takes up a lot of bandwidth? Not by today's standard. Okay, not by today's standard. 5-10 years ago, maybe it will be considered a lot of stuff. But these days, 280 megabytes, it's not really too bad. I do want to bring up one point here. I tried both methods. I tried both BitTorrent and a direct download, and the direct download was extremely slow. I have SureWest, I can go up to 2 megabytes per second. That's how much bandwidth that I pay for. And with the net install direct download, which is the right hand side, it was really, really slow. I was watching 0.1 megabytes uploaded, and then you wait, and then another 0.1 megabytes got downloaded. Okay, it was really slow. But when I used BitTorrent, it was fast. It was just using up all 2 megabytes per second bandwidth that I have, and just got everything downloaded in a jiffy. So that's what I want to share with you, because you can choose whichever one you want to use. Okay, it's just that with one it is a little bit faster. Okay. Yep.
Does the school block BitTorrent traffic at all?
I think the school blocks some of the ports. I don't know. I may not have a BitTorrent client installed on my live CD, so I cannot tell for sure.
I know for a fact that BitTorrent does not work on campus. Don't ask me how.
Okay. Even when you're running just as a client and not
Doesn't matter
not
if
seeding.
you're on a client computer, if you're on any of the networks on Wi-Fi, it doesn't matter.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks.
There you go.
Thanks for letting me know. And I will not ask you why you know that.
Plead the fifth.
I think a lot of people still think that BitTorrent is only for people sharing shady and bad content. They don't understand that BitTorrent is really just a tool, and how people use that tool depends on the people who are using it, which is really kind of unfortunate. It's really unfortunate that BitTorrent get associated with only bad content. So there you go. Okay, now the next question is, how do I know I'm actually at a Debian website? In other words, what if someone mess around with the DNS server, and the DNS server, I'm just going to explain a little bit of networking concepts here. When you look at the domain name, www.debian.org, it is just a name. It's just like, Tom, Jeffrey, okay? It's a name, and you need something to translate the domain name into, what your computer really needs to make that connection, which is the IP address. We talked about this a little bit, last time. And that is called DNS, or domain name service, which takes the domain name like www.debian.org and translate that into an IP address so that your computer knows, okay, where is the other computer and how do I get there? Okay. So if a DNS server is compromised, somebody can stick an item into the DNS server and say, you know what, www.debian.org is over here, and that is actually my personal server with tainted, install CDs, images on it. So how do you know that you're not getting to the wrong site in this case? Does anyone want to answer that question? Go ahead.
Is it because you're using HTTPS?
Now, if you're only using HTTP, yep, you got the right idea. If you're only using HTTP, it's really hard to know whether you're at the wrong website or the right website. Okay, and that's why with online banking, you never use HTTP. If you see an email and it gives you a link to a bank website, and it's HTTP. It starts with HTTP. You know for sure it is a spam. Okay, even if it starts with HTTPS, it may still be a spam. You have to actually read the entire thing to see whether it is legitimate or not. But most banks would not give you a link to click anyway. They would just say, okay, you need to contact us. Okay, so you will have to type the URL on the web page instead of clicking something in the email itself. Or sometimes they would even tell you to call them based on the phone number on the credit card or the ATM card. Okay, they would never let you tell you and just say click here to reset your password. Because that really is the most common thing that they would do, is to send you an email and say that, okay, your account has been compromised and we need you to reset your account so that you can continue to use your bank account. Otherwise, we'll freeze your asset or whatever, right? And here's a link to reset your password. So you go there, and what do? You enter your username and your password. Of course, that's not Linux specific, but still. Okay, so the way I know that this one is probably legitimate is because the protocol is HTTPS instead of HTTP. HTTPS stands for HTTP over SSL, or secure HTTP, and the way it does, the way it secures a connection is the transmission itself is encrypted. Okay, that's one thing. But the second thing that's really cool about HTTPS is certificate based. Okay, so whoever is www.debian.org owns a certificate that has to be signed by a certificate authority, a CA. Okay, and what a CA does is they would authenticate or check the identity by calling a number, by visiting a site, by replying to an email to the domain name. So they have their own ways to verify that Debian.org is Debian.org. It's not somebody else trying to pretend to be Debian.org and get a certificate of Debian.org. Okay, so there is a process there to make sure that the certificate itself is proper. The other thing is the fact that I'm seeing a green arrow here. Excuse me, not green arrow. Too much cartoon. So the reason why I'm seeing a green lock here is because everything checks out. Okay, if it doesn't check out, it's not going to be a green arrow. Green lock. Sorry. Green arrow is a character in is it DC? Yep. Yeah, one of the Titans, right? Yeah. All right. So let me go to a website where the certificate is questionable. Okay. And the best one to go to is my own website. So drtech.org also can serve HTTPS, and you get this. Okay, this site, security certificate has expired. It's not wrong. It is not spoofed. It's just expired. But your browser will tell you something is not right about the certificate. And you will see a cross here, and HTTPS has a strike through and is in red to emphasize that, it's questionable. We don't know whether you should go here or not. So if you click proceed anyway, at least in Google Chrome, it will still let you through and go there. But whenever you use this method, it will basically remind you all the time when you look at the URL that this HTTPS connection is questionable. Okay. Now, when you double click on this, or just single click in Google Chrome, you can check the identity of the website, and you can click on this one to check the certificate information. And in this case, the common name is correct. Okay. And in this case, the common name of the CA is CA Cert Signing Authority, and it's called cacert.org. I use this because it's free, okay, so I don't have to pay for my certificate. For what I do, this is okay. Okay, it's just my personal server. It's not really used to host anything that is sensitive. And you can also see the validity of the certificate was it expired like a year ago, more than a year ago. So that's why it's complaining. Okay. And what about Moodle itself? Now Moodle itself, has a clean green lock, so it's good to go. And once again, you can click it and click on Okay, it's identified. Okay, but where's my certificate information? Right here under connection. So we can look at certificate information, and you can see who issued the certificate. In this case, it's VeriSign, and it's up to date. Okay, it still has a few, I would say about 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks left. Okay, before it expires. So when it does expire, when you go to Moodle, you will get that page. You'll get a yellow page that says it has expired. Okay, so don't be alarmed if you see that page, because I don't have enough time to update the certificate. It's a manual process. All right. Are there any questions about this step here? What is the significance of checking the certificate when you are about to download an ISO image to install Linux?
Make sure it's actually them that you're downloading it from.
Yep, you're double checking and make sure that whatever you're downloading is actually coming from Debian.org, the organization itself, and not somebody else pretending to be Debian.org by poisoning a DNS server. All right. So when you download it, it's going to take some time, and after you download the image, there are further instructions here. So there's this question. I'm not going to say anything about the question because I think I might have spilled the answer already. And this part talks about how when you use HTTPS instead of HTTP, you have the protection of encryption. But in this case, when you're downloading an ISO file, encryption is not really needed because it's just an ISO file for a distribution. But what you're using in HTTPS is the authentication part of knowing what you're connecting to is the actual website Debian.org and not somebody else. All right, and I'm not going to answer this question because you have to do these steps to answer the question. But I have shown you the steps to what you need to do to answer that question. All right. So question 3, which is kind of like a third step, is to download the actual file. So this part talks about how to download the file, and it might take you some time depending on which method you use to download the file. And you're supposed to use the i386 version of the distro. In other words, you either click on this link here or this link here. Okay, so pick one or the other, but I want to use just the basic i386 architecture and not the AMD 64 one. There's no need. We're only going to allocate 512 bytes of RAM to the virtual machine, so there's you gain nothing by using the 64-bit of the kernel. Okay, what is the reason to use a 64-bit kernel? How much RAM do you need in order for it to make any difference? At least 4 gigabytes. That is correct. Okay, so if your system has at least 4 gigabytes, that's the threshold. Okay, if you have more than 4 gigabytes, you should use the 64-bit version. And if you have less than 4 gigs of RAM, you might as well just use the basic version, because 64-bit architecture is not going to be useful. In fact, I think if you have less than 4 gigs of memory, using a 64-bit kernel can slow it down, because the addresses are now longer, so each instruction is a little bit longer, and it just takes longer to execute the instruction, and you're gaining nothing in the process. Okay. And also make sure that you use AMD 64 when you have a 64-bit architecture. When you want to install it natively on bare metal, use AMD 64 and not IA64. What is the difference between AMD 64 and IA64? IA64 refers to Itanium, 64-bit, and not the Intel. Okay, this is something that you can look up by yourself. AMD 64 versus IA64, and what are the differences? And this is a different distribution. Different question here. So let's go to Linux question, and somebody is asking the question: AMD 64 or IA64? And this is the best, quick and easy, and also the one of the best answers is AMD 64 is what most Intel processors actually use. It refers to the instruction set. When you extend the instruction set to use 64-bit instructions, the original instruction set that Intel used is for the Itanium processor. And that instruction set turned out to be not very successful. Okay, so it was not really used a lot except for Itanium processors that people install into servers. Okay, so those processors never made it to desktop or laptop computers. AMD, on the other hand, came up with their own extension to their 32-bit instruction set, and that's why it's called the AMD instruction set or extension to the processor, original instruction set. That one became very successful. It was popular. And what happened in the end was Intel decided to borrow, in quotes, the instruction set from AMD. So that's why when you want to install a 64-bit operating system, you are actually going to install the AMD instruction set and not the Intel 64-bit instruction set. Okay? It's not really relevant for our discussion here because we are not going to, we don't need 64-bit to begin with. All right. And here I ask you what is the approximate size of the ISO file that you just downloaded. I'm not going to answer the question. Some of you probably already know what the answer is because you paid attention as I talked about this stuff. Okay, so once we have the ISO file downloaded, we can start up VirtualBox. And when you have VirtualBox started up, you want to create a new VirtualBox or a new virtual machine in this case. And I'm going to assume that you use the name ciss342 client because this is going to be the client computer that we'll be testing. For the type, we want to select Linux, and for version, we want to select Debian, and make sure it's not the 64-bit version of it. We just need the usual, basically implied to be 32-bit. Click next, So it's just, a bunch of stuff that you have to go through. When you create a virtual hard drive, you have to be sure that, if you want to have to bring that virtual machine with you to a different machine and you want to transport it on a USB thumb drive or an external hard drive, you have to make sure that you're not using FAT32 because FAT32 has a limitation of how big of a file you can create. And sorry?
2 gigs.
See?
2 gigs.
2 gigabytes. That is correct. Okay. So with FAT32, the largest file you can create is up to 2 gigabytes, which is not going to be enough for this virtual machine. Okay, so you have to make sure that your USB thumb drive can handle files larger than 2 gigabytes. What is the new FAT32 partition? Is it called extended FAT32 or extended FAT? Okay, so that's one, and NTFS certainly will be able to handle it without any problems. The next page lets you select hard drive file type. And in this particular screen, you have multiple options. You can basically select many different versions. VirtualBox tries to be compatible with VMware, so you can actually specify VMDK, which is a format used by VMware. It is also possible to select QED or QCal for compatibility with QEMU. But since we are going to use only VirtualBox in this class, cross-compatibility is not going to be a main concern. So you can just go ahead and use VDI, which is the default, the first option, and then click Next. The next screen allows you to specify storage on physical hard drive. Then you select whether the hard drive file is a growing type or whether it pre-allocates the entire capacity ahead of time. The difference has to do with if you select dynamically allocated, it means that if you're only storing like a few, let's say a few hundreds of megabytes on the file size is going to be only a few 100 megabytes. Okay, even though the full capacity in concept is 8 gigabytes. So it will only chew up more storage on whatever storage device that you're using to store the file as necessary. Now, using this way is good if you have limited space on your hard drive. It is not so good if you already have lots of storage on your hard drive and you want to make it go faster, because the pre-allocated option, which makes a 8 gigabyte file to begin with, is more efficient. Okay, it doesn't have as much overhead compared to this approach, but you'll be chewing up all 8 gigabytes right away. Even if you only use like 20 or 30 megabytes out of it, it will still be creating an 8 megabyte file. Okay, so this one depends on your system and how much space you have left. If you say, well, I have 1 terabyte left on my hard drive, 8 gigabytes is nothing, You don't have to use dynamically allocated. You can use the pre-allocated version. On the other hand, if you think that I might need to move this file around a lot, okay, copy it from the desktop onto a thumb drive, take it to some computer, work on your homework assignment, bring it back, and then copy it back onto the hard drive, then you might want to select dynamically allocated, because that way you don't have to move as many files. It won't take as long to copy the file. So this part is up to you to decide. The next screen let you change the default size of 8 gigabytes. 8 gigabytes is going to be plenty for what we're going to do in this class, but later on, if you want to do something that is beyond what we do in this class, let's say you want to install a GUI with this particular installation of Linux, 8 gigabytes may not be enough. You can allocate more, especially if you already selected dynamically allocated in the previous screen. You can just make it much larger, because it's not going to chew up any more space, or much more space than just allocating for 8 gigabytes. And then we should be back to the main screen of VirtualBox. We're almost ready. And the last step, which is highlighted here, let you specify how your ISO image is going to be connected to the virtual machine. So basically what you need to do is to go to one particular menu item, use a drop-down box, locate the ISO file that you just downloaded in the previous step, and say that this ISO file will now be the image of the media in this virtual CD-ROM drive. That's basically all you need to do. One thing that you want to be sure is do not click this option here. There's one option right here. There's one option which is a checkbox that says live CD, DVD. That checkbox, if you check it, that means the drive will stay, the media will stay inside the tray all the time, okay? And if you uncheck this box, it's only for this time, okay? So I would uncheck that box, if that's what I'm doing, and make sure that it's not always, included, because that might make it difficult to reboot the system onto the installed version on the hard drive later on. All right, and this is a question that you can only answer as you complete the process, because it asks you something about the name of the what is displayed on screen at that time. All right, the next screen talks about click OK from the VirtualBox setting dialog box, and now we can get it started. With the virtual machine that we have just selected, click Start from the toolbar, and that should bring up the boot menu. What is the item that is selected by default? Okay, this is something that you can only tell when you run the installer CD. So I'm not going to answer the question for you. All right, so from here on, this is question number 6. There are only like 11 questions, but some of the questions have really, really long text, because I just want to explain the process and concepts that are related to the installation of Linux. For the most part, it's really just saying default, default, default. Press the enter key, enter key, enter key, and so on. There are several things that you do have to be careful, because when it asks you about the host name, okay, so this part is important. You want to enter your last name as one word, okay, as the host name of your machine, because later on, I'll give you scripts to run on your virtual machine, and then the output of the script becomes something that you have to turn in as your submission. So I'm going to check the host name, your account name, and stuff like that. So you do have to make sure that this part is done and not using the default, which is Debian. Okay, so make sure that you follow the instructions. You can still change it later, so it's not like, if you don't follow this step properly, that you have to redo the whole thing all over again. You can change the host name of your Linux installation pretty easily. It's just one single text file, but why do that if you can just do it right the first time? Okay, so just try to follow the instructions carefully. Leave the domain name empty, press the enter key, set up users and passwords. You'll be asked to enter root password. Root, in this case, when you talk about root in Linux, there are at least 2 meanings. Okay, in this context, it refers to the root account, which is equivalent to the administrator account in Windows. Okay, but in Linux, it's called the root account. But root can also mean the root folder, which is the top folder in the file system. So in this context, it's just referring to the root account or the administrator account. All right. This screen has several options, okay? So read the third paragraph on this screen, so you cannot, I cannot tell you what that paragraph is going to talk about. And according to this description, why is it not a good idea to leave the root password blank? Okay, the answer is in that paragraph. Okay, so you got to get to that step in order to answer this question. Some of you may know the answer already. Some of the difficulty of creating multiple choice questions is I have to think of wrong answers. And sometimes it takes a lot of creativity to come up with the non-correctly incorrect answers to make them look like, well, maybe that's the correct answer. The next screen, or the next question, starts with a question of, well, should we use sudo or not? Now that one, this topic does relate to the security of a system. In fact, there's a big argument of whether we should sudo or not to sudo. Okay, if you use Ubuntu by default uses it uses sudo. You have to do things to turn off sudo and return to use su or switch user to switch from an end user account to a root account. With Debian, it's the opposite. Okay, they by default want you to use su and not sudo, so you will have a different password set up for the root account, and the regular user cannot elevate privileges to the root level unless you later on manually go through the sudo process or configure sudoers, which is the name of the file, to configure that. So the question now is, should we do it or not? Should we use sudo or not? Okay, so the first thing I want to do is to explain what is sudo, and then we'll talk about, is it a good idea or is it a bad idea? If you use sudo, you don't have a separate password for the root account or the administrator account. In other words, when you install Linux, the first account, the first quote-unquote end user account would also be serving as the administrator account, but you have to use, you have to prefix a command with sudo to basically say, okay, with this particular command, I want to run it as root. Okay, and if you set up sudo, in a way, it would ask you for the password, but that would be the same password as the usual password of that particular end user. All right, so the same password is now serving two purposes. It is the password of the end user himself or herself. It is also the root. It's also the password to gain root access in the system. The argument to use sudo is, well, since root itself as an account cannot be used to log in, so it stops a lot of attack patterns, because whenever a hacker wants to attack your system, or whenever a script wants to attack your system, the first thing it's going to try is to try to log in as root, because it is one account that is always there. It's the root account. Okay, so the first thing they will try through SSH or Telnet or whatever protocol you support is to say, okay, I want to log in as root, and then they will try a dictionary attack. Okay, just to see whether someone is going to be using root as the password of the root account. Okay, believe it or not, some people do. Okay, and some people use really quote unquote smart variants of root, like R00T, not smart, R007, not smart, uppercase R007, not smart. Okay, because all of those variants are easy guesses. Okay, for people who already have a dictionary of common passwords for root. Okay, so that's the argument of using sudo, is you basically turn off the login ability of the root account itself. So unless they know a valid user account name on your system, they cannot even try to log in, because they don't have the account name to try to hack into your system. So that's really the premise behind the use of sudo. Now, on the other hand, sudo, it can also be insecure, because with sudo you don't have a separate password for the root account. It is quote unquote the end user's own password. Okay, so some people, when they set up, let's say when they set up Ubuntu, they're going to say, oh, this is just an end user account. I'm going to use something that I have always been using. It's not particularly secure. So that becomes the problem, because then people think that this is just a regular end user account, but it's not, because it has the ability to use sudo to gain root privileges. Now, sudo can get extremely dangerous if someone goes into the sudo file and say, oh, okay, from this account I should be able to sudo into root privileges without asking passwords, because you can set it up that way. Okay, now that becomes really, really bad. because now someone can, if you leave your terminal open, or someone for whatever reason has access to the end user account, that person can now just say sudo and then can run commands as root. Okay, not a good idea. Okay, but some people may do that, just for convenience. If you use SU, you won't have that option open. Okay, SU just does not allow you to specify no password for root. Now, but what about someone who's trying to hack into the system remotely? Let's say through SSH and say, okay, I'm going to log in as root and do a dictionary attack on that account. What is the counter to that attack?
Disable root login.
Yep. The first thing is to disable root login in SSHD config. Okay, that just turns it off completely. Okay. The second thing is to make your root account actually make it use a secure password. Okay. So there are ways to make it secure, and which one is really more secure, I cannot say. Because both can be made very insecure. If you turn on the root account as a separate account, but use a simple password, that doesn't help. Okay. On the other hand, if you use sudo, and you turn off the password requirement to enter passwords interactively, it is also insecure. So in either way, you can make a system secure or insecure. It all has to do with do you know the impact of a particular decision. So as far as I'm concerned, they are not, one method is not better than the other one. They're about the same. Okay, so at the end of the day, it is the password that really matters. Okay, if you choose a strong password, it is going to be a strong password. And this one we talked about a little bit already. With all these different passwords, what are you gonna do to track these passwords? Well, writing it down on a small notebook is actually not as insecure as you think it is. Okay, or what most people think it is, insecure, because no one can hack into a little notebook that you keep in your pocket. They have to physically steal that notebook from you to gain access to that notebook. Okay, and you can also write your password in permutations that is known only to you. I'm just looking for my blue prop here. Okay, I found this on the internet. It's really cool. It's a aluminum case that is spring-loaded, so if you just leave it like this, it opens up by itself. And it's a very small type of notebook. And it gives you a little pen, and the pen is also going to be the mechanism to hold it in place. Okay, so this way, you don't, actually easily destroy your little notebook, and you can keep it in a pocket or inside a waste pack or whatever you want to put it inside. And if you put your password in here, you just have to keep this thing, as close to you as your wallet, basically. Okay. And you don't write your password down the way it is supposed to be. You can write it down backwards. You can write it in different permutations. You can offset all the letters by one, change all the lowercase to uppercase, all the uppercase to lowercase. You can do a lot of things that is known only to you, but to someone who picks up the notebook, who doesn't know anything, will just try to type it in. And it's not going to work. Now, granted, that person can try all the common permutations, but after a few tries, I think most people will just give up. Okay, so I think it's not, this method is not very insecure. It is secure if you do it in a certain way. Are you guys kind of getting the idea, the concept? The other thing you can also do is, on the same page, you might have multiple accounts and the passwords, but you can cross everything. In other words, the first item listed actually uses the last password on the same page. Okay, so you can think of your own way so that only you know how to read that page correctly, and other people will have to spend a lot of time to get to the right combination, and most people will just give up after a few tries. All right, are there any questions? All right. I have well, this is kind of like side note. It's not Linux specific. I had a keyboard that I bought really inexpensively because I like the Lenovo keyboard with a touch point in the center. And those keyboards tend to run pretty expensive. I mean, they're usually about $100. And one time I was on eBay and I saw someone selling these keyboards for like $20 or $30 each. So I bought 3 of those. And of course, I forgot to actually read the details of those keyboards. They were all European keyboards. So the keys are all at the wrong places. The symbols are all wrong. They have the euro symbol instead of dollar symbol and stuff like that. So I was going like, bummer. Oh man, I bought 3 of these things too. What am I going to do with these keyboards? So I plugged it in anyway, and I was just saying, okay, let's see if I can just touch type, okay, because I can touch type, and you know what? Touch typing works just fine. So the key code are exactly the same thing as a US QWERTY keyboard. It's just that the labeling of the keys are different. So in order to make use of the quote-unquote European keyboard, you actually have to make your operating system aware that you're using a quote-unquote European keyboard. Then it will map the key code to the different characters compared to a US keyboard. Now, why did I mention that? That's a security feature. Okay, you just use a keyboard with the wrong labeling, and that that keyboard works just fine if you touch type, and you give someone your username and your password, but not the username, but just the password. That's going to take that person a little bit of time to try, because the person will try to use the labeling on the keyboard to try to enter the password, but it's not going to work. Hmm? Yep. You can switch that too. So if you touch type in that variant, you can write down the key sequences in QWERTY. So anyone who's trying to enter it verbatim is not going to work. That's not going to work at all. All right. Now this one can be changed later on. So if you accidentally just type 1 2 3 4, press the enter key, and then 1 2 3 4, press the enter key, it's okay. We can fix that later. Okay, it is a problem that we can fix. And of course, on the physical computer, you have to make sure there's no keylogger, physical keylogger installed, because that can defeat everything. If you have a keylogger already installed. After you enter the root password twice, you can enter the full name of the first user, the first non-root user. In this case, you want to use a full name, first name first, and so in my case, it will be Tech Aoyang. Press the enter key to continue. The next screen let you select the username of the first non-root account. In this case, I want you to use your W followed by 7-digit student ID as your default username. So this way, when I give you a script to run, to summarize, what you have done to the computer to verify that you have done all the steps, it will report back correctly. So your host name and also your default username for the non-root user would be personalized to you only. Right? You should still use a strong password, just so that it's you don't leave any chances. In this case. Also note that the installer does not enforce any password policies. That can be enabled later on, okay? But when you're installing, it does not do a single thing. Yep.
I'm not sure if you set it up a certain way, but I don't think you can access it until I think the VirtualBox quiz is graded. So I can't even do it if it says that you require a particular grade or something like that. You can't really see what
Oh, okay. Okay. That one is not self-graded? Okay. Got it. So I'll have to go ahead and mark those as graded. Can you see the score once you do that one? No? Okay. I think it has to do with I didn't set up an expiration date or did not set up a due date. So the system never knows when to close it in order to grade it.
Set up a close date for the third, the VirtualBox.
Oh. That would not be good either. Okay, let me fix that one first, and then you know what? I'm just gonna open it up so that you guys can actually start to do it. So I'm gonna remove the grade condition. Okay, how do I remove it? Done. There we go. And change the due date. It's timing. No, set it up to the 8th. Oh, you mean the other one?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, but this way I'm just changing the new one so that it does not require that you have to finish the other one first. You kind of have to finish the other one first anyway, because you wouldn't have VirtualBox to run the virtual machine to begin with without finishing the other one first. So I'm gonna just get rid of that one. Time zone, no big deal. And then the next one is going to be a big one. It's called partitioning the disk. Okay. So we'll go ahead and start a new slide to talk about how to partition for a fresh installed Linux distribution, Linux installation. We're going to select the manual option. The first three options are, I think the first one is guided installation. Use the entire disk. The second one is guided, but use LVM. And the third one is guided, use LVM, and encrypt the entire thing. Okay, and then the fourth option is manual, which is basically saying, okay, don't guide me. I'm going to do everything by myself. Okay, and we're going to select that option, which makes it longer. Okay, it makes the installation process significantly longer in this case. But it's worth it. Okay, there's a reason why I'm doing this. There is one way to improve the security of the entire system, and I just spelled out the answer of a previous question accidentally. But I'm not gonna say which one. Okay, what is the question or what was the answer to that one? But I did spell it out. That particular option has two downsides. One, it will have, if you have 8 gigabytes allocated to the entire virtual disk, that particular method will use up all 8 gigabytes. It will create a virtual disk of 8 gigabytes on your host system, even though you turn on dynamic allocation. Okay, it has to do with the fact that it will have to first fill up every single bit of your virtual disk with random bits. So that basically creates a write operation to every single byte of your virtual disk, and that's why it's going to use up all 8 gigabytes. You might as well turn off dynamic allocation, if you choose to do it that way. Okay, so that's the first downside of that approach. The second downside of that approach is it's going to take a long time. The reason why it's going to take a long time to complete is because coming up with a random pattern is not an easy thing. Okay, we might think that, just coming up with a random number, how difficult can that be? As it turns out, if you want your random, quote unquote, random bit pattern to be more random than just what we call pseudo random, it is actually a lengthy process. So it will chew up a lot of processing time, and you're running this as a virtual machine, which means you have overhead to begin with. So if you choose that particular option, it's going to take a long time to do it. And there's no need to do it either, okay? Because certain files and certain mount points really do not need to be encrypted. Just said the answer again. So we're going to do it that way. So once we selected the manual option, press the Enter key. In the following screen, you'll be presented a disk. Okay, typo here, D-I-S-K, not D-I-S-C-K, to be partitioned. And what is the name of the disk? This part is also something that you can see when you're going through the installation process. Okay, all of these seem like something that is legitimate, but only one is the actual proper answer. Okay, once you select the manual option, you will have to divide the hard drive into partitions. And this is why I'm not using the guided way to do it. The guided way to do it will allocate a big chunk to /home and a small chunk to the root system, and it will also allocate swap space, which is something that we don't need as a virtual machine. So that's why I don't want to use the guided method, because the guided method doesn't really give you a whole lot of option to tune the size of each partition. But doing it this way, we have full control over the sizes of each partition. Okay, the first thing we need to do is to understand what exactly is a mount point in Linux. Okay, a mount point in Linux is basically a folder that can be linked to a particular partition, or that is linked to a certain partition, a certain hardware device. I can illustrate that by going to the command line here and just run the command mount. Okay, so this is the result of running the command mount, which looks really kind of cryptic. So the question now is, what exactly is mount? What is being shown here? This Okay, let me pick one that is kind of more obvious. Okay, this one is kind of obvious. This is what we call a mount point. In other words, this is just a folder of the file system that is being run at this point. Okay, it's a particular folder, but the files mapped to this folder is coming from this particular partition. When you see something starting with /dev or device, it is a hardware device. Okay, so in this case, SDB2 is actually referring to hard drive 2, which is what the B is. The 2 is representing the second partition of that hard drive. So everything in the second partition of the second hard drive of this system is going to appear as if they are files inside /lib/life/mount/persistence/SDB2. Okay, and this is different from how Windows does things, or at least on the surface. Because with Windows, you have the concept of drive letters, C:, D:, E:, and so on, and that's actually a pretense. Windows internally, Windows NT, the kernel, actually uses the same method here, but it still uses the drive letter nomenclature because it is backward compatible to earlier versions of Windows and DOS. Any questions about this part? What a mount point is? Okay. When you look at these mount points, this particular system doesn't do it this way, but on certain systems, /home, okay, if I do a ls/home here, this is where all the end user files are located, okay? It is equivalent to C:\users for most modern Windows installations, or users and settings. Is that one of the common ones for Windows systems? You guys remember the folder where Windows, store user files?
I think it's just users in Windows 7, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Windows, it's users in Windows 7, but they changed it from something. The standard was not the same, in XP or in earlier versions of Windows.
Yeah, with documents and settings.
Documents and settings, and then under that you have the usernames, and then under that you will have the files, under each user. And in Unix type, systems, it's just /home by default. Okay. So /home in this case doesn't have its special mount point, but in our virtual machine, switching back to the description here, we want /home to have a special mount point because I'm going to encrypt the partition corresponding to /home. In other words, when we use system files, like executables, the kernel itself, we don't really need to encrypt those files, okay? Because those are files that we install from the Debian distribution to begin with. There's no need to hide them. On the other hand, when an end user saves files, we want to keep those files encrypted. So when the computer is turned off, okay, and someone get physical access to the computer, rip the hard drive out, that person would not be able to read the content of the files under /home. They can read everything else, but not anything that is end user, that belongs to end users. Is that making any sense? So this way we can control, only this portion of the partition needs to be encrypted. Nothing else needs to be encrypted. And I mentioned here that the /var mount point on some systems can also need to be encrypted, especially on servers, because on the server they put a lot of files under /var, including files corresponding to databases. So if you are running MySQL or PostgreSQL or any type of database, you would also want to have your /var to be encrypted because that's where the database files are located. Okay, but since this is a client system, I'm not including /var into this discussion. Slash itself, which is the root folder itself, has one single mount point, and that is not going to be encrypted. So in the process, you want to select the hard drive, which is SDA, press the enter key, blah, 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 blah. And I talk about the sizes. Okay, so you want the root folder to have allocated 7 gigabytes. So the majority of the storage capacity goes to the root folder, and then for the home folder, it's going to be like 500 megabytes minimum. You can allocate the rest of it. It doesn't really matter. We are not going to use up all that space in this class. All right, so I'm just going to kind of quickly go through this part here, and at the end of this process, it will confirm what type of algorithm is used to do the encryption, and these are the choices. You have to kind of pick one out of these choices, and you will only know it by the time you get there, or you already know all this stuff. Then you can answer the question right away. But then you have no need to take this class to begin with. All right, next screen. Okay, this next screen is kind of just going through a lot of defaults, changing, the mount point of a particular folder and so on and so forth. The rationale behind all of this. So you can read through all this stuff here. I'm just going to skip to the important part. This part is very important. Okay, I guess, it is important. In the process of encrypting a partition, it will ask you for a passphrase. Okay, and they recommend the passphrase to be 20 characters or longer. Okay, the thing about this passphrase is, unlike the root password or any password of any account on the system, there is no way to rescue it. Okay, now let me just kind of roll back a little bit and say, well, what if you forget the root password of a particular Linux box and you have physical access to the machine, or you basically run the virtual machine interface to that particular machine? There are many ways to rescue it. Okay, there are many ways to go back into the system and check use a rescue CD to log in as root, mount the file systems, and then you can go back and run password after chroot, and not recover the original password, but you can change it to something that you know. Okay, you can overwrite the password. Okay, that can be done fairly easily. In other words, for the most part, you can rescue a system with lost passwords, no problem. But when it comes to hard drive encryption or partition encryption, if you lose the password of an encrypted partition, it's going to be done. You're done for. I mean, that partition is lost forever. Or the content is lost forever. So you have to be careful. Okay? This one, I really think you should write it down, because there's no way to recover if you lose it. Now, I have to say this, with first-person experience, because I almost lost the password, the encryption password, to the Moodle server. That would be bad, because that would impact about 1,200 students or so that are currently using Moodle as an LMS. But the nice thing is, it does run on an encrypted encrypted partition on the server. So even people working for the district would not be able to actually get to the content once the virtual machine is turned off. All right. So are there? Yep. Go ahead.
So you have to enter it in when you boot? You have to enter in the passphrase when you boot?
Yes. Every time it reboots, I have to enter the password.
And this is built into the Debian installer, the encryption method? Or
Yes.
Using something
Yep.
like
Yep. I tried to do this in Ubuntu, and that was about 2-3 years ago. And the Ubuntu installer did not have an option to set up things like this. But Debian has had this option, from a long, long time ago. Whether it's still like this or not with Ubuntu, I'm not sure.
It gives you the option.
So now it has that option. Okay.
How does
Yeah.
it, in terms of performance, does it hurt quite a bit?
It does hurt performance, but it's only visible when you are running it inside a virtual machine, because you're running with overhead to begin with. So now you have overhead upon overhead. So it does impact performance a little bit when you're running it inside a virtual machine.
Whenever you do read write.
If you're running it, on bare metal, and you have a reasonable processor to begin with, not really a whole lot. Especially when you only encrypt stuff that needs encryption. So that means that all the /USR subfolders are not encrypted. So all the commands are not encrypted. The kernel itself is not encrypted. The modules are not encrypted. So as long as those things are not encrypted, you're going to be okay for the most part. Most programs also have caches. So it's going to cache something in RAM to begin with. And once it's decrypted from the encrypted hard drive and put into cache, it's going to be decrypted in cache for the entire duration in cache. So that's why once you have an encrypted system loaded and running for a while, the performance actually would basically speed up for after a certain amount of time. But it's not terrible if you have a reasonable setup. All right. So after the encryption password is specified, you will be returned to the overall partitioning screen, and you'll find this particular name as the encrypted volume, and then you have to associate that with /home as a mount point. So these basically are just really detailed steps that you have to go through to set it up. Nothing really too important, other than don't lose that password, okay? Because if you lose that password, that's done. Okay. And then you install the base system, and once the base system is installed, in the process, it will ask you for the mirror, country. The U.S. is fine. You basically just take the default of most of these things. Just press the enter key, the enter key. Not really a whole lot of stuff that is related to security. When you are asked, what is the purpose of the virtual machine? You don't want to select the desktop. You want to unselect the desktop environment, print server, and laptop options. Okay, because otherwise you will have a pretty bloated installation with the GUI and stuff like that. You do want to select SSH server, because that's one thing that you can do that will allow you to open up multiple terminals to get into the system. So that makes doing your homework assignment a whole lot easier. Because otherwise, you have one console. That's it. You cannot open up a man page with one and edit a file with the second one. You don't have that option. But once you install SSH, yep, you got that option open. All right. So that's basically what the next paragraph is really about. It's, we can run PuTTY as a result. And you can also transfer files once you have SSH running. You can use WinSCP in Windows, and in Linux systems, you can just use SCP as a command line program to copy files between machines once you have SSH running. And then the next screen confirms to install the grub bootloader to the master boot record. With a virtual machine like what we are doing here in this homework assignment, it's okay to overwrite the master boot record because this is the only operating system. Okay, so you're not going to overwrite the master boot record of Windows or some other installations. So it'll be perfectly okay. When you're trying to set up a dual boot system, then you have to be a little bit more careful. Okay, because if you overwrite the master boot record and the other operating system relies on what is on the master boot record, then you have to do certain things to make the other operating system still usable on the system. I have set up dual booting, on many different machines at home, and I have yet to run into a problem, which doesn't mean that it's completely safe. It's just that you want to be careful when you do that. All right, so we're almost done. The instruction asks that the installer media be removed first. This is actually going to be okay, because VirtualBox as an emulator understands the command, the hardware command to open up the CD-ROM tray. So when it sees that command, it will actually deassociate the CD-ROM ISO image from the drive itself. Okay, so it's actually pretty smart about doing that. And then after you reboot, you should see a screen that let you log in, okay, which is not the installer itself. So I'm asking you, what do you see first? And it's one of these things. I'm not going to tell you what answer you should be getting because some of you remember what I just talked about a little bit early, and you know which prompt is the first one that you should see. And the beginning of this paragraph answered the previous question. I'm not going to say why, but it does. Okay. So once you sign in as a non-root user, you can do a few things. You can run df space -h to look at how much space is being used. You can run top to look at the processes, how much RAM is being used. So here I'm asking you, how much RAM is being used by the system at that time, and you look at these numbers, and you can you basically pick one that is the correct answer. And I have two things of the same value. Well, if you think it's 500 megabytes, just pick one of those two. Okay, they will be scored the same way. I'll just put it that way. But when you run top, you will find out how much RAM is actually being used. The answer may surprise you. Press Q to exit the top command, and then switch user using the SU command. It will prompt you for the root password. Enter the password, and then at that time you can run the power off as a command to turn off the virtual machine. You can click that little X button to turn off VirtualBox altogether, but it's not recommended. It's like yanking the power cord out of the outlet. So you want to use power off as a command to properly shut down the machine. And oh, before you use power off, you have to tell me what is the prompt that you see on the system. So it should be one of these things. And also, by the way, W1234567 W1234567 is actually your actual user ID, and then last name is your actual last name, because none of you will see this if you set up the system correctly. Okay. And I think that should conclude it. The next one is really just a description and not an answer. Okay, so that's just concluding the whole process, and give you a mechanism to back up the virtual machine, which is to use file and then export appliance from the menu bar of VirtualBox. This will package all the files necessary to run your virtual machine into a single file. Okay, and if you save that file onto a USB thumb drive, you can take that to any machine that has VirtualBox already installed, do an import, and now you can run your virtual machine on a different machine. So it's a pretty convenient way to package up everything that you need, and so that you can continue to run your experiment on a separate machine. It does take time. It will take you. It took my machine about 7 minutes to do it. I have a i7 mobile processor, but that's from 3 years ago. So the performance is probably medium low by today's standard. So that took me about 7 minutes to save that, to export the appliance file. So if you have a relatively new machine with a really high-end i7 processor, it will probably take you, I'm guessing, maybe 4 minutes or so. If you have a slower machine, it might take you like 15 minutes or so to create the appliance file. Are there any questions? I'm right on time today.
Still can't access.
I
Uh,
did. Oh, did you?
You cannot access the new assignment, this one, the one that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think I logged out. Let me try again.
Okay, let me double check in. Oh, you know what? That's why. This is why.
When I was looking
Oh,
at
because it complains about you must choose a grade item. Okay, my bad. I cannot do a none here. I guess I have to leave these things empty and not specified. I didn't read the message earlier, so that was my bad. Okay, give it a try now. You should be able to get into the quiz now.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All
Is
right.
there a follow-up to this class?
Sorry?
Is there a follow-up to this class?
Nope. This class is actually a quote-unquote clone of the Windows version of this class. So when you go through the student learning objectives, it's almost like a complete copy of that class. They just replace Windows with Linux. All right. Are there any other questions related to what we talked about today? Okay.
Is there any specific topic we should be planning on getting to for?
I'm going pretty much sequentially in this case. We are currently in topic 3, how to turn off Surface, and Bastille. You might want to read Bastille just to know what it is, because we will run experiments based on Bastille. That's called harden, but that's not assigned yet at this point. And then in topic, if you have time, you can move on to topic 4, which talks about local file permission and ownership, which is really a kind of important topic, because we first have to understand how Linux treats ownership of a file and also access control to a file. So that particular thing will be useful. If you have time to get to topic 4, click on this link here and read that. Right. Any other questions that I can answer? Nope. Okay. I'll see you guys on Thursday. And if you do the homework assignment and you run into a problem, just let me know, and then we can address those on Thursday.
I have to wait for the computer to upload to Dropbox.